In this video, I am going to show you how we can solve some complicated equations that specifically involve grouping. We're going to look more at absolute value equations and squared equations that you've already seen, but now some tricky ones that involve grouping. So you right now already know how to solve this equation. You know that we are going to divide everything by 3. That's going to give us the absolute value of 2x plus 1 equals 5. We then, because it's an absolute value equation, are always going to be looking for 2 solutions. So I'm going to split this equation into my 2x plus 1 equals positive 5, and then 2x plus 1 equals negative 5. And then I'm going to solve each of these. I subtract 1, I get 2x equals 4, then divide by 2, so I know I have x equals 2. And then here, subtract 1, so I get 2x equals negative 6. I divide by 2, and I get x equals negative 3. So again, I have 2 solutions, 1, 2, because I have an absolute value equation. When we see something a bit more complex like this, I want you to think about combining like terms. Our terms now, though, are super fancy. Instead of just combining x's or y's or a's or b's, we're now combining bigger groups. So that's why I was saying this involves grouping. If you notice here, we have the absolute value of x minus 3. In fact, I specifically have 2 groups of the absolute value of x minus 3. I also have the absolute value of x minus 3 over here, but this one is 4 groups. So I have like terms. Both of my absolute value symbols include x minus 3. This allows me to combine these like terms. So if I have 2 groups and if I have 4 groups, that gives me a total of 6 groups of the absolute value of x minus 3, which equals 24. This then brings you right back to an equation you already know how to solve. We're going to divide by 6. That leaves me with x minus 3 equals 4. I'm then going to make my 2 equations because we're looking for 2 answers here. So I have x minus 3 equals 4, and I have x minus 3 equals negative 4. We're going to add 3 to both sides. So one of my answers is x equals 7. And my other answer here, when I add 3, is going to be x equals negative 1. So again, the majority of this here is what you already know. It's this first step that is new. And again, it's just super complicated, just combining like terms, which in theory you also already know how to do. So here we have a squared equation, again, something that you're familiar with. We're going to divide everything by 6. So now I have x minus 2 squared equals 9. We are going to square root. Again, we're looking for 2 solutions here because it's a squared equation. So I'm going to have x minus 2 can equal positive 3, or I can have x minus 2 equals negative 3, because this square root of 9 can either get me to positive 3 or negative 3. When I solve, I'm going to end up with x equals 5. And when I solve here, I end up with x equals negative 1. Again, a squared equation, I have 1 solution, 2 solutions. So now we're back to something tricky. But again, it's very similar to what you already know, just a little more complex. If I look here, I have x plus 5 squared, specifically 3 groups of that. When I look over here, I also have x plus 5 squared, but I have negative 5 groups. So combining like terms, just a little more complicated. If I have 3 groups and negative 5 groups, that's going to give me negative 2 groups of x plus 5 squared equals negative 8. You already know how to do this. I'm going to divide by negative 2, divide by negative 2. That's going to give me x plus 5 squared equals 4. We're going to square root. We are looking for 2 solutions here because it's a squared equation. So I have x plus 5 equals 2, and I have x plus 5 equals negative 2. When I solve these out, I'm going to end up with x equals negative 3 because I've subtracted 5 from both sides. And here, I'm going to end up with x equals negative 7 because, again, I subtracted 5 from both sides. So essentially, these equations are very similar to what you already know. The complexity, though, comes with combining like terms. We're taking 2 things, combining like terms and these absolute value and squared equations, and just putting it together. So 2 skills you already know how to do, but now combined into more complex equations. If you have any questions, let me know.